Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We hope you guys had an awesome weekend, good start to your week so far, and I hope that you guys are doing well, staying encouraged, staying positive, and we trust that you guys are working hard, and I know that you are. I can see it in your work, so I want to say keep it up, and I'm proud of you guys. I know a lot is different, but you guys are doing a really good job with it. I'm really excited because we are in Israel. And I'm curious if anyone's ever been to Israel. If you have been, could you please let me know, either send me pictures or tell me your experience, because my dream is to go to Israel one day. I would love to go. Now, it is very dangerous to go to Israel because of all the conflicts that are over there. We're going to talk about that actually right off. But I would encourage you, don't let the danger scare you. Yes, you should be aware of it, but um, at the same time, if you ever get the opportunity to go to Israel, you go. Mainly because we as Christians consider Israel the Holy Land. You see it here at the very bottom. Jews and Christians call this area the Holy Land because this is the foundation. I'm sorry, this light makes my eyes look weird. Um, Excuse the glasses, contacts are getting old. Anyway, so it's hard when everything's closed. But the Holy Land is our I'm sorry, Israel is considered the Holy Land because of what has taken place there. At least for me, I have a very not wild. I don't want to say wild, but very alert or very active, I guess you say, um, imagination. And whenever I was in New York City, I was just thinking all the history that has gone down in New York City. And to think, like, George Washington was in this city. Obviously not, like the city that we know it. But when I was there, I was just thinking about everything that happened in New York City. Well, I can only imagine what I would think if I go to Israel, to think this is where David would walk through the streets of Jerusalem, but probably most importantly, the most important is this is where Jesus walked. To walk in the same place that Jesus walked, to see the same things Jesus saw. Obviously not the buildings, but just the landscape, especially if you go to some of these geographical features that we're going to look at. It's just amazing to think about, let alone actually be there. So I would love to go there one day. But how did the state of Israel come about? Well, it wasn't until 1948 that Israel finally gets their land back. Do you remember when Israel lost their land? It was way back before Christ. In fact, it was 586 that the southern kingdom was captured. So think 500 years before Christ, and then now 1,900 years after Christ, Israel finally gets their land. The Jews are finally home. That's why this is such a big deal. In fact, this is prophecy that the Bible says that the Jews will be back in their own land. So this is a huge deal, but it comes about because of the Zionist movements and these um, Jews that are wanting to take back the Holy Land, which we've seen before. We saw that way back in the Crusades where they tried to take back the Holy Land. They weren't able to. They were trying to take it back from the Muslims, and of course that's where the Jews are trying to take it from, up to 1948. Well, 1948 is right after the World War II, and England, as we saw in the last slide, owned the area of Israel known as Palestine. And because of these Jews in the Zion, the city of Zion area, they create this movement to pursue. I know you guys are all looking at the boy right now. Maybe he sees me. Anyway, don't get distracted by the boy. They were getting ready for this taking over of Israel, not by force, but mainly for the Jews and to invite all the Jews from the world. In fact, that's exactly what happens. The Jews from all around the world come and really take back Israel. But we're not going to focus very much on the political side. We're going to talk a little bit about it at the very end. But I would like to talk about the physical features, which this is what we can see today that Jesus would have seen back then. A bunch of the physical features. We're going to talk about a lot of landscapes. Um, so hope you hold on tight. There's going to be a lot. So keep all this straight, especially for the quiz that you guys will be having. Now, we're talking about the plain of Philistia first, and we're kind of going to work our way around. If you have your books on page 446, I would reference that map. I don't have it on my notes, I apologize, but I would like you to reference that map because we're going to talk about things like the Gaza Strip and some of the mountains, the valleys. So keep that straight. But the first one is Mount Shephelah. You may have heard that name before. In fact, a lot of these names will become very familiar. But we see the valley of um, Shephelah, the low hills, and this is leading up into Jerusalem. Now, when you get into the city of Jerusalem, you can see some modern day technology like the wires, the antennas, but you're also going to see some ancient features as well. In fact, this is known as the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, and you can see a bunch of people here, especially up against the wall, and those are the Jews that are praying at the Wailing Wall. They call it the Wailing Wall because you hear the wails of the prayers, the recitations that they're saying. And the reason why they pray at this wall is because this is the last remaining wall of the temple. Now, what you can't see is right over here is a big building, which we're going to see in a little bit. We've already mentioned Jerusalem. This is going to be the largest city within Israel, obviously the capital. Now, it's not going to be recognized by a lot of countries, especially around Israel. In fact, most of the countries around Israel do not even acknowledge Israel as a legitimate country. They say, yeah, they have their government, yeah, they act like a country, but they're really not a country because they don't like the Jews. They don't believe the Jews should have their own land, and they want the Jews wiped off the face of the map. In fact, they will tell you that they want Israel off the map. So that's why it was a big deal whenever President Trump acknowledged Jerusalem as the official capital of Israel, and it kind of shows the U.S. supporting Israel, which the U.S. has for a long time. Depending on which president you're talking about, would show more or less support. Now, this is coming from the battle, or I'm sorry, the valley, not battle, of Jezreel as you go from Jerusalem, and that will lead you to Mount Carmel, which may sound familiar. This is where Elijah calls down fire from heaven, into the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. This is the picture I wanted to talk about. You'll notice the same wall, but here we see this big dome. In fact, if you know just by the architecture, this is Muslim or Islamic architecture, and this is an Islamic building. In fact, this is really their holy building. It's called Dome of the Rock, and this is where we believe, and the Jews believe, that the temple was built. This is called the Temple Mount. Is what this is often called. Now, the Muslims consider this holy ground for them. Now the Jews consider this holy ground as well. So this piece of land is probably the most fought after in all of Israel. And it's a really big deal. In fact, I want to draw your attention back to page 445. This isn't in our PowerPoint, but I would like you to mark it because it may be seen later. But on 445, you'll see Israel. Right under Israel, look at the first sentence. That says, three issues galvanize the country of the Middle East: Islam, oil, and opposition to Israel. And then you read later, it says the most important or the most destructive is the opposition to Israel, which was what I was saying. Most of the countries want Israel wiped off the map. Now, what most will consider Israel's capital, this is where our embassy was for a while, was Tel Aviv. Now, what's interesting about Tel Aviv is this is the most important port for Israel, in fact, their largest port, and this is the port of Joppa. This is where we would have seen Joppa in the Bible. Now, I am on page 446, if you'd like to follow along with me. And on 446, you will see the map top, and this is where I want you to use the map because, sorry, I don't have it up here, but I want you to find Gaza Strip. If you're looking at Israel, you will see the word Israel, and then look directly to the left toward the Mediterranean Sea, toward the west, and you will see this kind of small outline, this small box, and it is called the Gaza Strip, and within it is the city of Gaza. Now, Israel owns this for the longest time, but then in the 70s, Israel pulls their military out. Whenever they do, they're trying to set up a strong enough government there, but the terrorist group, the Hamas, comes in and occupies the Gaza Strip. Now, this is where we hear a lot of turmoil from. In fact, just a couple months ago, we saw rockets being fired back and forth, and honestly, that's pretty consistent with these terrorist groups firing into Israel. This is really their foothold into the country of Israel, the Gaza Strip. Very important. Now, to the north of Israel, you'll see the country of Lebanon. And this is, Lebanon is very productive, but they are not very friendly toward Israel. Together, you will go through the Great Rift Valley. It's kind of interesting. You can see the camels off going through. It's very desertous, but it's very productive as well with modern irrigation. Now, it goes below sea level, which is where we find one of the most famous parts of Israel, is the Jordan River leading into the Dead Sea. On 446, again, on your map, you will see the biggest body of water that's in Israel is the Dead Sea. If you follow the Dead Sea up, you'll see another small body of water, which is the Sea of Galilee. We're going to see a picture of that in a little bit. But the Dead Sea is very famous because of the salt contents. In fact, I don't have the picture up here, but if you turn your books to page 453, you can see a picture of the Dead Sea and all the salts that has accumulated. And it's accumulated because it's so far below sea level and there's no rivers flowing from it. The water comes in and then it doesn't go anywhere. It'll evaporate. So the water will leave, but the salt that has come in does not evaporate. In fact, it crystallizes, and you can see it on 553. So the Dead Sea is probably one of the most famous attractions, geographically speaking, in Israel. But as far as Christians are concerned, probably the main one is the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, because within the Mount of Olives, we see the Lord praying his most earnest prayer, where we see drops of blood and sweat. This is where he prays, Father, not my will, but thine be done. And it's just an amazing scene that we see at the Mount of Olives. And you can visit that to this day. The Sea of Galilee, I mentioned, you'll see a picture of it. This is a pretty large sea. I don't want you to be fooled by the picture that's on 446. Yes, it's smaller than the Dead Sea, but the Sea of Galilee is pretty big if you're standing there. And this is where we see the storms brew up all of a sudden. This is where we see Jesus calming the water. This is where we see Jesus walking across the water. So a lot happens. Now, we mentioned the Mount of Olives being a big place for Christians. The Sea of Galilee is another one as well because of everything that's been done. This is where we see the fishermen fish on the Sea of Galilee. Now, archaeologists have done a lot of work in Israel, and they have found cities upon cities. It's because whenever cities are destroyed, oftentimes people will build over or on top of the destroyed city, and that is called the tells. And you can find many tells throughout Israel, and they have such rich content as far as history is concerned. Now, as we go into the politics of Israel, one thing I want you to know is the name of the Hebrew parliament, or the Israeli parliament, and that is the Knesset, located in Israel. Now, I want you to notice the Western Bank. You'll hear that sometimes in the news. That's very hostile, and this is toward the western side of Israel. I'm going to quickly go through this. You see a lot of biblical references, but I want to focus on in the Great Rift Valley we've already seen. We've seen the Valley of Araba, and within this valley we can find Masada, which has some very interesting history behind it. King Herod builds it in 35 BC, but it wasn't really used very much since then, until the Romans